Tomorrow. A Pinocchio fanfiction written by Jukebox Straws. Read by Jukebox Straws. You can't do this. The bottle shattered against the mirror, shards of tinted glass and silver falling to the floor in a deadly rain. Oh, really? The coachman folded his gloved hands neatly in front of him as John seethed, claws digging into the wood of the table. Who's going to stop me? You? And who do you think the police will believe when they find a poor, defenseless old man mauled to death by a savage fox? John stopped and peered over the coachman's shoulder at the mirror he'd just shattered, his broken reflection staring back at him, brown eyes that were almost human but not quite. The uncanniness of his own face was not lost on him, the face of a fox, and yet he still desperately clung to those human features about him, remnants of his old life. You will pay what you owe me, John. The coachman's voice grated on his ears, and suddenly John felt his control slipping. Once he lost control of a situation, it was over for him. He'd slip back into that dark place, that bottomless pit of despair and agony, forever at the mercy of someone else's whim. Plus interest. Though he supposed that was the exact pit he was in right now, a pit he couldn't dig himself out of no matter how hard he tried. You won't ever let me go, will you? The coachman sipped his pint with a raised brow. So you're finally catching on, he chuckled. Took you long enough. No matter what he did, no matter how much he sucked up to that greedy charlatan, the coachman would keep him here forever, work him until he dropped like he did with every other poor, naive soul he sent to that cursed island over the years. That island scared him. Every time they ran low on funds, the coachman decided that he would make another run to Pleasure Island, and John always found every excuse in the book to not be on that ferry when he did. The only other person who knew about his irrational fear was Gideon, and that cat would never tell a soul, quite literally. That island was where his worst nightmare began, a nightmare that became his reality, and then very quickly, his entire life. That island was where the coachman had swindled him into a debt he could never escape. Go home, John. It's late. I'll see you bright and early tomorrow. The coachman stubbed out his cigar and grabbed the lamp. He lumbered out of the dark tavern and into the night, leaving John alone to navigate his way back home, in the dark and the rain. Sure, tomorrow. By the time John got home, it was well past midnight, and his clothes and fur were soaked. Gideon peeked over the edge of the book he was reading. He always waited up if John stayed out later than him. Things didn't quite go according to plan, John mumbled as he stripped himself of his hat and overcoat. He ran his fingers over the patched holes in the fabric, sewn together with whatever scraps Gideon had from his recent sewing projects. He might be gearing up for the island again soon. Gideon shivered and looked at John with an absolutely wrecked expression. Gideon knew how much John hated that island, and had seen it with his own eyes what they'd both gone through. Don't worry, I'll get this debt paid soon. Then we'll live like kings, eh, old boy? He nudged Gideon's shoulder, hoping to lighten the mood as he shook out his fur. He headed into the small bedroom they shared, his bed on one side, Gideon's on the other. A dresser with a mirror on one end of the wall, a wash basin on the other. He slipped out of his coat and suspenders and stood in front of the mirror again. This one was shattered too, like the one in the tavern. But unlike that mirror, this one had been broken long ago, by fists that were much smaller than the ones balled up on the wood now. Gently, he slipped his gloves off and stared down at his hands that hadn't been human or animal for years. Not quite hands, but also not paws. He had thumbs still, and long, bony fingers. He was always a rather scrawny child. But his finger pads were raised, thicker, darker, made for traversing hard ground. Forcing himself to look at his broken reflection for the second time that night, John shook as a tear slipped down his furry face. Every day he lost a little more hope, became a little more empty inside. Each boy he lured away from their families to be brought to that dreaded island, with every scream, every desperate panicking bray of a donkey. He could feel it, pieces of his soul slipping away. Soon he would be just as cruel and heartless as the man who trapped him here. Why? Why me? He thought as he unbuttoned his shirt and kicked off his spats. Why was he different from the other boys? Why couldn't he have just been turned into a donkey like the rest of them and sold as a slave? Death would have been a more welcome salvation than eternal servitude at the hands of a madman. He swore the mirror almost cracked again as he stared too hard at his own reflection. He looked, really looked, for the first time in what felt like years. John Worthington Foulfellow was still in there, buried beneath cigar smoke and red fur. Brown eyes that were always a little too bloodshot if you were close enough to see, too big for the skull he'd grown. Ears that never moved, not the way a fox's ears normally would. Teeth that felt a little too human inside that abnormally elongated snout. Only 3 fingers on each hand, the 2 middle ones melded together years ago while he watched in horror. He'd remember how the fur itched as it grew alarmingly fast all over his face and body. How it had hurt when his bones cracked and reshaped themselves. He remembered seeing Gideon's horrified face, now as uncanny as his own, as he screamed for mercy. The police had done nothing. Nobody wanted to help him or Gideon. Everyone shunned them, saw their animal forms as evidence of their misdeeds, punishment for their ill behavior in their youth, forever labeled, forever branded as shifty, untrustworthy monsters. In a way, John guessed, they were right. The coachman had forced them to do unspeakable things, unforgivable things, kidnapping boys, luring them away, selling them for profit. No matter how hard they cried, no matter how much they begged for the safety of their parents, their mothers, John would send them away, send them somewhere they'd never be found again. Sometimes he even had to kill to keep his secrets. 1 or 2 pesky, nosy bodies got themselves into deep water, and it was John that always had to take care of it. Tie up the loose ends, if you will. A quick knife to the gut in the back alley, a broken bottle to the back of the head in a secluded farming field, or a quick trip out to sea with a rope and a sack of bricks. He'd seen it all, done it all. Perhaps that's why he could never go back. He'd earned the exaggerated title he'd been given when he was transformed into this amalgamation. Monster. There was no denying it now. That was what he was. If not literally, then at the very least metaphorically. Forever stained. What was I thinking? He rested his head on the dresser, but jumped when he leaned back and his tail brushed the bed frame. His stupid tail. He hated the thing. Chopping it off seemed more like a viable option with each passing day. But Gideon tended to hide the knives when he was home, opting for mallets or hammers instead. He couldn't take his tail off with those. Safer. It disgusted him to know that Gideon had to hide the knives when he was around. Those thoughts buried themselves in his mind, convinced his brain that his body was being overtaken by some kind of intruder, and the only way to get rid of it was to chop off his limbs, skin himself alive, hope that once he peeled away all the fur and chopped off the tail, the old him would still be lurking just beneath. But as Gideon came into the room, yawning, and settled into bed under the sliver of pale moonlight from the open window, he just sighed and followed. He'd deal with everything tomorrow. Tomorrow was another day. He'd do it tomorrow, though he wasn't sure if there would be one for them. No man was ever promised tomorrow. But then again, he wasn't exactly all man anymore, was he? The end.